Welcome back to part two. We're going to start to get into understanding different file formats. First off, if you go to the website, I have a link. You want to download these zipped files. They are specifically for this class as we kind of go through the introduction. And we just want to open them up and see what they're like and actually jump in and see what different formats look like, and also kind of an understanding a little bit of the way that you write out files as well. So we're going to go ahead and kind of jump into that. So let's go ahead and get started. If you go ahead and unzip the Nuke 101 class files, you'll see a whole bunch of these different options here. And I'm trying to get you guys into common formats you'd be using in the industry. You'll be using DPX sequences. That's usually the big one with VFX. There's DNG files, which would come from a Blackmagic camera, an Ursa. There's CG renders, which are like OpenEXR file formats, as you can see here. There is 32-bit floats like HDRIs, lat longs, which we'll be getting into. And then you'll be talking about other quality images as well, such as 6300. We also have some checkerboards here. And to kind of explain what checkerboards are basically when you go ahead and shoot with a specific lens, like, if you have a camera and you have a lens, and you're going to track that, either 2D or 3D track maybe, it's good to undistort the footage if you need to. And that's why we shoot a checkerboard. And you can see in these images here that I went ahead and filmed with the specific camera lenses, and every camera lens is unique, so you have to use that specific camera lens. And I've just filmed a flat screen LCD screen with a basic checkerboard pattern. It doesn't have to be the one you see here, but it is definitely something that you want to do so that you can undistort the plate, because everything in the camera world has lens distortion. And we're going to get into that and understanding how when you film, there's a curvature in the sides of the frame, the top, bottom, and left and right have a sort of curve to them. And we cannot have that in a 3D realm. We need perfect perspective lines inside the 3D world. So we have to kind of take that out and then we'll put it back in at the end. So again, a long story. We're going to get into that later on. But for now, let's go ahead and just jump right in and start to play with these files a little bit. So I have Nuke open, and I'm going to go ahead and just read in some of these files. So to read in a file, you have up here, you have different options, read and write. Things come in as read, they leave as write. So I can just hit read, grab that and grab the files if I want, or I could just come over here and use the hotkey R while my cursor is over the node graph. There we go. So here is the folder itself. You can navigate to it on here. Sometimes it's a little bit weird. In here it has a very traditional way of finding things. You can go, if you're trying to find your desktop, that would be C, user, your name, desktop, and so forth if you're using a PC, and so forth. So here's the different file formats. Let's go ahead and pull some of these in. You can see I can just grab the EXR file, 32-bit float panorama HDRI. And I can also grab a whole bunch of other files in here as well. I can grab the holding down Control. I can go ahead and get the A6300, the Antique DPX file, the Dynamic Range file, the Red Code Raw R3D file, the Exposure MPEG-4 file, and then another MPEG-4 file right here. These are folders. You'll know they're folders because they have actual little dashes here, underscores or whatever. And you're going to go ahead, we're going to actually take those sequences next. So I'm just going to grab everything that we have here and hit open. There we go. And one way to kind of organize all this is just lasso grab the files and hit L, and that'll sort of line them all up for you, which is nice. Now the next thing I'm going to do is bring in some image sequences here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit R for read. And if you go to the Antique Shot 1 DNG RAW sequence, you can see right here we have a 613 to 704. Those are frames. This is an image sequence. To see these individual frames, I could turn off the little sequence tab here. You can see you can bring in individual sequence images if you want. But I'm going to keep sequences on so it recognizes the pattern here, which is the information and then underscore, and then you can see an actual number for each frame. So I'm going to turn on sequences, click and grab it, and again, if you want, you can bring in multiple of these. You can just hit open if you'd like, and there's the file. And then if you read again, you can bring in multiples by coming in here, going to go to the shot 2 now, grab that, and then while that's grabbed, I can go ahead and go up an arrow, which is up a folder, and come to the CG renders, hold down Control, and get my alien passes. So now I have that selected. Oh, it didn't work. That's interesting. So anyway, let me show you the final way we can do here. So here is this DNG raw sequence. You can actually pull folders in as well. So I can go ahead and take the folder, drag it in. I'll take whatever is in there, if it's an image sequence or whatever, and you can see that it's brought it in. So I'll just kind of line this up a little bit better here. And I'll just grab these guys and hit the L key to kind of organize them a little bit. All right, so I'm going to go through these each individually by putting my viewer in there. So again, I could just put this in here, or just grab this and hit the number 1. So here is a HDR image. This is commonly called a lat long. If you're working in virtual reality or HDR for lighting a set, this gets mapped onto a sphere. If you're in VR, it's getting mapped onto a sphere, and that's how you're looking around in VR. If you want to full frame this, again, you can hit the space bar in any one of these quadrants. So if I hit the space bar here by having my cursor over the node graph, you can see I have access to the node graph individually. If I put my cursor over the viewer here and hit spacebar. So again, just hit spacebar, drag over here, spacebar, spacebar. So you can actually maximize these windows. So if I hit spacebar to maximize the viewer and hit H to fill it up, you can see that we have here a lat long with a little bit of the tripod in the shot. Usually that gets painted out. But one thing you'll notice that's a little interesting about this image, and we're going to start getting into the understanding of image quality. Image, you know, what are we dealing with? Is it compressed? Is it raw? These are the things you got to be aware of. This is a 32-bit float image. It was taken by a series of exposures and brought forth in through HDR in Photoshop. So it has a lot of information of it. It's a very heavy file. Most images will have a normalized value from 0 to 1. So if you look at this red, green, and blue information here, you'll start to see that it'll max out at 1 when you get to white, or black, it'll just go back to 0. But in this case, because this is an HDR, we have a lot more information to play with. You can see the values here are reading 7.8 in the red, 8.25 in the green, and like 10.06 in the blue. That means there's a lot of information here. We can actually physically see this information if we come over here and take our viewer exposure down. And there you can start to see the sky is starting to reveal some detail back here. Even these buildings have detail. That's not the case for compressed files such as 420, 422, 444, I'm sorry, 420 and 422 footage. You're never going to be able to pull that information back like you would in a nice HDR image or an EXR and so forth in this case. So this has got a lot of information in it, and you can play around with it. And again, it's used to light a set. We used this a long time ago to light a Transformer character that was in the scene. So just kind of be aware of that. So I'm going to spacebar out of this. And let's go ahead and keep moving. So just be aware the values in the white here you can see are very high. Okay, and that just tells you that there's a lot of information that's going to really have a lot to play when we actually kind of use these images to light our scenes in CG for the heavy highlights and actually replicate the shadows just like the shadows are replicated here. So the information is done a lot of the times when on set. People will record with a 360 cam, and or through some sort of bracketed system, and they will record their environment, and that'll light the CG in post. So the next one we have here is just a couple checkerboards. These are just basic either still images. In this case, if I take a look at it, this is an MPEG-4. So you'll notice each one of these has a different frame range sometimes. So if I click on this image here, if you go to the dope sheet, you can see, oh, look at all these images. That's because I have all these images in my properties bin. I'm going to go ahead, and I told you before, I'm going to put my properties bin to 1, so it just stays with one item at a time, so I don't have a ton of stuff in here. You can see the frame range in this circumstance is frames, looks like frames 1 to 108 for this, and I can physically move this around just like in After Effects if I want to, if I want to move it up and down. So we're going to go into a little bit of understanding of this here in a minute. This is I'm talking about the actual animation slider and so forth. So just be aware, if I go ahead and look, there's 3 options here for what you can choose to be put as the in and out point. Global, input, in, out, and visible. Okay, so global can be used to be based on your S for settings. For instance, if I come over here, put my cursor over here and hit S, you can see my project settings shows up in the properties bin, and my frame range is 1 to 108. So if I put this to 1 to, say, 13, now because I have this set to global, my time frame, if I hit play, is just going to be frames 1 to 13. Okay, no biggie. I can change that again to frames 1 to 40. Now you can see it gets extended over here. The other thing you can do is input. So if I can input, it just looks at what the frame range is of this image. If I go ahead and click on it, you can see the frame range for this image, this image here, sorry, is frame range 1 to 108. And what it does is, you can see this little option here for hold, loop, bounce, and black. Hold will just keep that last image over and over again. It'll basically go to a still image if it goes past frames 108. So you can see now my frame range is set to 108 because it's set to the input of the read node coming in. And then you have in out. This is kind of cool. So I'll go ahead and put this back to global, and then I'll just make an in out. So I'll hit I for in, O for out, and I put that, you can see it's a little 10 and 32. You could physically move these around if you want with your cursor. And if you were to play them, you could see it's just going to stay in that range there. You could also play, obviously, you could play backwards, which is kind of cool. And then with that, I can go ahead and say choose in and out. And now you can see the range is shifted to the in and out positions there. And again, I could middle mouse scroll wheel out or in if I want to move around. And you can kind of like, just get used to kind of using that. All right, let's move on to this one. This is, again, using one of the Rokinon lenses, 14 millimeter. And again, you can see the curvature that you can see that's inherent with filming. This is because you have a bowed lens. Well, we don't want that in CG. In CG land, everything is perfect perspective straight lines. And I can demonstrate that by hitting tab here and showing you, if I look around in 3D, we don't see bowed information along the edges here. You could see the line stays perfectly straight, like perfect drawings, perspective lines. And we have to remove that, and we use this checkerboard to remove that information from our original plate. So we're going to keep going here. We're going to talk about dynamic range in a minute here. Put that one up a little bit. And we got Red Code Raw 4K. This is from a film that I worked on called Thrill Ride. And I'll go ahead and put this to input. And again, you can see these in and out points don't stick with it. So again, I usually just drag them in and kind of push them against the wall here, and then they stay put. I didn't put a lot of frames in here because Red Code RAW files are huge. You can see in the little bounding box information here, this file is 4800 by 2700. This is a 4K file shot on the Blackmagic, oh, I'm sorry, not the Blackmagic, the Red camera, the experimental camera they had, which was only black and white. And you can see that it's 4K, so it's a heavy, high resolution. There's also a lot of data in here. If I double-click this image here, you can see this looks a lot different than your average read node. You've got a couple of information here regarding the dealings with the red information. And you can see over here you have Kelvin, tint, ISO. You actually can change all this in post. Usually when you shoot with a DSLR and it's compressed to H.264, you don't get these options. But with red, you have the option of changing things such as exposure. You have a lot more play in case your cinematographer screwed up on the day. So obviously color temperature is not going to matter because this is a black and white image, but you can change it here. You can also change the ISO. You can see it's a lot darker. I believe the native ISO for the red is around 800. And then you can bring up the shadows. There's all types of stuff here you can do just before you start color correcting, which is really cool. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the next image, which is yours truly. I'll put my viewer to there. And I shot this with my A6300 by Sony. I like this camera. It's a good run and gun camera. It's cheap. It's $1,000. It gets you S-Log 2, S-Log 3, which are nice tools to use for grading. And I did it I blew up my face here for a reason. I wanted you guys to see the reality of dealing with information that's compressed and so forth. This would be a 420 compression. So again, I'll be going into details on that a little bit later, but for now you can see I got this hotspot here. If this were red and I were to bring down my exposure like I did on that lat-long HDR, you would start to see the details in my face, but you don't see those details. It just becomes muck. It becomes mud here. all those details in my pores would have been exposed if I shot this on RAW. So I wanted to show you guys the limitations of shooting on your DSLRs and why cameras in the affordable range, such as the Ursa 4.6K by Blackmagic, is probably a good investment if you're going to do a feature film. If you're doing commercials or something quick, and you can get the time to make sure the exposure is spot on, then you're good. But say I didn't want to be overexposed here, I'd be in trouble because it's just the reality of, you know, shooting with compressed formats. All right, so we're going to move on to this one, shot 2. We'll jump ahead here. So this is shot 2, Sony a6300 1080. This was with the a6300, as you can see, at 1080p. 50 millimeter. I shot at 1080p instead of 4K because you don't get any rolling shutter, and rolling shutter is that sort of squiggly effect when you pan the camera back and forth, which can affect tracking. So we're going to be using this for an exercise. You can see it's not that exciting. It's, you know, for what it is. I think I shot this at Cine 4 setting on the camera, not S-Log2 or S-Log3 or anything. All right, so let's jump over to the next shot. And this one we're going to be used for 3D tracking. This is in Orland Park, Illinois, where I live. And there's this old rundown out-of-business antique store. And you can see if I play, nothing's happening. That's because I need to set my options here to input. Now you can see the frame range is 613 to 704. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit I and O and drag those or in like that so that I have the time frame. Now, what's important about this, the resolution, it's 4000 by 2140. It's 4K. And you can see if you go ahead and click on it, it's a little bit different too. If I take a look at the read note of my a6300 footage, there's nothing really much going on here, but the second I pull over to this image, we have some additional options such as color temperature, tint, exposure, and shadows, which is really cool. You don't get as much fun as you can with using red footage, but you still get to do post-color temperature, tint, exposure, and shadows. There is no option for ISO or anything like that. So if I kind of take a look at this and play around, you can see I can do a post dealings with color temperature if it was off. So if it was too blue or if I want to warm it up, I can do it. Obviously, you want to get somewhere in the middle there. This is a very dull, overcast day. It was kind of rainy. And then tints will go between usually magenta and green. You kind of play back and forth. You can see if I push it this way, it by default it puts it to 12, which is for usually for the Blackmagic 4K. And exposure is great because I can start to bring down information and you'll start to see details out here without them just becoming mud like I showed you earlier with my face. And then shadows, you don't want to push this too much, but you can lift the shadows a little bit. In this case, they usually just turn into mud. But I just maybe amp it up just a little bit to kind of bring up the shadow details if I want to. So let's go on to the next one. This is an EXR sequence. This is something you would render out of 3D Studio Max or Maya or Moto or say Houdini. In this case it was Maya. And I'll put my viewer to that, and you can see I'm going to go ahead and play it, and you can see it's just not moving. That's because we have to click here and go input. And again, I only have 4 or 5 frames for this. It's frame 68 to something. So I'm going to come over here, hit the letter I, come over here, hit the letter O, and I'm going to go ahead and just expand this. So I think I only got like 3 frames or something. Not much. So I'll go ahead and hit play. So his head's kind of moving. This is actually from a longer sequence, but because of space, I wanted to kind of keep it small. Now this is a little bit of information. This is interesting because this here is an EXR sequence, okay? It's a 32-bit information. You can see now, if I were to put my viewer back to, say, any one of these old files, you can see the pull-down window over here has RGBA and alpha, right? That's it. Now, if we go with the alien passes, and we're looking through that, we have a whole bunch of passes in here. We have alpha, which is the transparency. We have depth. And depth itself, I kind of play with it a little bit. You start to see there is information in there. Barely, but there is information of depth. And if I kind of go across it, you can see the values are what are called super whites, which are over the value of 1 that are not normalized. You can see like a values of 130 and only in the red channel. And then over here we have the plate shot. This is actually, these are different channels. You got to think of this as like a cable TV network. Like if you have Comcast and you have many different channels. You know, as you're watching TV and you're watching cable, you know that there's other shows playing at the same time on other channels. Well, that's kind of the concept here. This is your Comcast, and over here is your different passes. So you can see at the same time, We have information such as the reflections of the alien. We have shadows of the alien here, or at least the mask for the shadows. The diffuse, and these are all different passes that are rendered out independently so you can have ultimate control of your alien. Like if you just want to play with the specular highlights, you can color correct this. These all combine to make what's called a beauty pass, which is in your RGBA, which is what you're seeing here, which is specular highlights, indirect, and so forth. We'll get into all that later. But this is a common 3D rendered element that you will incorporate into live action, so I wanted you guys to get a feel for that as well. And last but not least, we have here called the, let's go ahead and put my viewer to it here. This is the antiques section here, and you can see that it's just shot one against another Blackmagic shot here, and we do have the options for changing the temperature and so forth, but it is a 4K image. I do like shooting with the Blackmagic 4K because it is a global shutter. Global shutter has no rolling shutter effect. Rolling shutter is basically when you have that sort of wiggle effect that you have. If you use your iPhone, just move it back and forth, you could see it. That's from what's called a CMOS sensor. Rolling shutter is an artifact that you get this sort of like wiggly effect when you pan really quick left and right, whereas global shutter, it grabs one frame at a time. It's not doing a top to bottom scan as the camera is panning around. And that's something that's very important to have when you're trying to do 3D tracking or planar tracking and stuff like that. And it's just important to kind of be aware of that. And again, I will link to a video at the bottom so you can get a better idea as far as what that's all about. So that's pretty much entails all the different file formats. And again, you can download these off the site. We're going to jump into the next section, which is kind of understanding color correction and everything else. So I really appreciate you guys seeing this. Again, stick with me as we kind of go through this. Again, I have never seen a website or a series actually try to teach filmmakers how to really get into live action CG. That's my goal, and I hope you stay with me for the long run to make your films look unique.